Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Now, as you are all aware that the Civil Services Exam 2019 final result has been declared, and we are elated to share that Rank 2 Mr. Jatin Kishore, Rank 3 Miss Pratibha Verma, Rank 4 Mr. Himanshu Jain, Rank 6 Miss Vishakha Yadav, and Rank 10 Miss Sanjita Mohapatra are all from RAU'S. And what adds to our overall achievement is the fact that our students Miss Gunjan Singh and Miss Kanchan Singh, who secured ranks 16 and 35 respectively, are our main scholarship test series students. It is also important to highlight at this point that Miss Anukriti Sharma, who had worked in our team, has also secured rank 138. Some of you might recall some DNS sessions that she has taken in the past, and she is presently undergoing training for the Indian Revenue Services. So the list of successful students from the RAU'S is a long one, and we will share the list of our achievers very soon. RAU'S has always kept the interest of students at the top of its agenda, and hence the success achieved by these students is even sweeter to all of us. We would like to invite all those students who have cleared the Civil Services exam this year and share their experience how DNS, Focus Magazine or Main Scholarship Test Series program has helped them in their journey. In order to connect with us for sharing your experience with the Civil Services aspirants, please share your details at mymentor@rau'sIS.com. Your experiences will help the Civil Services aspirants to chart a better course of action for themselves, and RAU'S platform will enable that these students share their success mantra and guide the future aspirants to write their own destiny in the very next attempt. From the entire team of RAU'S, we wish all the successful students all the very best. We are looking forward for sweets from all our successful students. So now let us start our discussion for the Hindu newspaper dated 4th August 2020. And the articles that we will be discussing today are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion.
Now, the government has yesterday issued draft policy to ramp up defense exports. This news appears on page number 10. And the aim of this policy or the draft policy is to achieve manufacturing turnover of around 1,75,000 crore by 2025. This has been released by Ministry of Defense. Now, as you can see that in GS3 syllabus, defense indigenization is an important topic. And hence in this regard, we are going to start by first understanding why we need to indigenize. What are the issues or current challenges in the way of indigenization of defense technology? What are the steps which have been taken so far by the government? And what are the details of this draft defense and export promotion policy? So starting with first, we need to understand that why we need to indigenize defense production. Now, although it is always a good idea to indigenize all kinds of technology, manufacturing and services, but it is more crucial and critical in case of defense technology. Because first and foremost, we spend a lot of money, and that to foreign exchange reserve in form of arms import. And you know that India is second largest arm importer, and hence it contributes significantly to trade deficit. By having a sound domestic defense capacity, India can not only convert this deficit into surplus, but also act as an exporting power as far as arms are concerned. Also, lack of domestic defense manufacturing capability has serious security implications as well. Because once you start importing these defense equipments from foreign countries, you are perpetually dependent on those nations for your security needs. And once you have purchased that equipment, even for the services, you are dependent on that particular nation. Also, having a domestic defense capability will lead to a lot of employment generation, and it will spur overall industrial growth, because you need to understand that defense is a propulsive industry. So it is not like an industry which will just fulfill its need. Once a defense project is established, a lot of other industries are needed to support it, and hence it has a multiplier effect. And finally, having a sound domestic defense capability is very, very important for strategic independence. Because once you can manufacture and develop and design your own arms and equipments, then you are not dependent on policies of major countries like USA, Russia, and other such countries. You must have seen that how India has struggled to convince USA that import of S-400 missile should be allowed and India should be kept out of the sanctions being imposed by America. So if you have a very sound domestic defense capability, you shall not be subject to such whims of other countries. So now let us understand that what are the challenges in the way of a sound domestic defense manufacturing sector. Before understanding that, you should know that the overall defense ecosystem is made up of armed forces who are the users or end users of these defense manufacturing technologies. Then we have DRDO, ace designing agency in our country, which excels in research and development. And then that design idea is transferred to PSUs and some private sector companies which make them. And then finally, although this component is quite weak in our country, but ideally there should be an academia which looks for the skill development in this particular field. So now the first and foremost challenge is that there is a lot of delay in defense manufacturing as well as in acquisition, because armed forces, DRDO and PSUs work in silos and there is a lot of gap in interaction among them, and hence the request of arms reaches DRDO quite late. Then there is a significant delay in the development and designing of the equipment, and finally when it reaches the PSU, a considerable delay is observed while manufacturing those products because it is public sector driven sector. Most of the companies involved in defense manufacturing right now are public sector undertakings, mainly because of the government policy, and hence either the final product is substandard or it is quite delayed. Then comes the issue of lack of critical technology because of lack of funds as well as lack of skills, because we have not been able to develop a proper research environment in academia. The top technical institutions like NIT and IITs do not have a specialization related to defense technology. The funding of the government as far as designing of new technology is concerned is quite minimal, which often creates roadblocks. Then we have an issue of long gestation period. All these technologies require a lot of time to bear fruit, and by then government simply runs out of patience and order an improved or quite similar technology from outside, which then scuttles the development program in India. And finally, we have had a lot of land acquisition issues which have delayed a lot of defense projects in our country. But it is not like government has not taken any step. We have an important department in Ministry of Defense known by the name of Department of Defense Production, which manages and runs ordnance factories which manufacture a lot of arms, and especially on the basis of technology transfer. Then we have a lot of defense PSUs, for example HAL and MDSL, or Musgaon Dock Shipbuilders Limited. Also, a lot of licenses are issued by the government for private production of the arms. So this is as far as the production is concerned. What about designing? For that we have DRDO, which designs and develops state-of-the-art defense technology, and few noted ones are Prithvi, Agni and Tejas. Then Indian Armed Forces also have in-house design programs within them, because they are ultimately the end users and they are best suited to at least draw some basic idea about the designs of their needs. Then the government has notified defense procurement procedures, which has made a category of equipments, for example made in India, built in India, design in India, and depending upon the percentage of indigenization, the government gives preference in acquisition. Then the government has also come up with various schemes, for example Make in India, Startup India and IDEX. And recently the government has also launched defense corridors. Two of such corridors are in UP and Tamil Nadu. If you know the location, comment. So let us now look at the major goals and objectives of the draft policy. Now the first is that it wants to achieve a turnover of rupees 1,75,000 crores, including export of 35,000 crore in aerospace and defense goods and services by 2025. Then it aims to develop a dynamic, robust and competitive defense industry, including aerospace and naval shipbuilding, to cater to the needs of armed forces with quality products. Then obviously it aims to reduce dependence on imports, as we have talked, and it wants to take forward Make in India initiative through domestic defense designing. It aims to promote export and defense products and become a part of global defense value chain. And finally, it aims to create an environment that encourages R&D, rewards innovation, creates Indian IP ownership, and promotes a robust and self-reliant defense industry. So how it wants to achieve these? Now the draft policy clearly lays down 6 major actions which will take. The first is procurement reforms. Now we understand that procurement of defense equipment is totally under the hands of the government, and it has proposed to publish a negative list. Now what does this mean? Now a negative list of weapons will be notified with every year timeline for placing a restriction on import of all such items from those dates. So for example, government will notify that from 2024 we will not import helicopters. So now this is a kind of assurance to domestic aviation industry that government has clearly stated that it is not going to import helicopters, and now it is time to invest in this particular sector. And government has in the draft policy proposed that the negative list will go on increasing every year. We also know that defense procurement is a highly specialized activity that requires a priori estimation of the development and production lead times, life cycle costs, and maintenance requirements. So in order to do that, a project management unit has been proposed with representation from all the services, which would be set up to support the acquisition process and facilitate management of these contracts. Like any other manufacturing, MSMEs are also very important ingredient of defense manufacturing as well. And in that, the draft policy proposes 2 important things. First is that it is going to promote component manufacturing by MSME immediately once it becomes a policy. So now the government proposes that it might make it mandatory that all the parts of any equipment shall be manufactured by the MSME sectors. And then it proposes indigenization portal where all the services will list out their demands, and the MSME sector will then propose their ideas as well as the solutions, also the products related to those. And the acquisition will take place on that portal. Then government also proposes the optimization of resource allocation. So for example, currently all the expenses on acquisition of capital is shown under one head. Now the government is planning to make a distinct budget head in all the services for domestic products, and it is going to make it compulsory for that amount to be spent only on domestic products. Then government wants to promote investment by implementing ease of doing business policies, which the government is already on it. Then just like defense corridor, government has also proposed in the draft policy to notify aero engine complexes. These complexes shall basically focus on manufacturing of aircrafts as well as MRO activities. If you know the full form, please comment in the comment box. Then what about the innovation in which India is pathetically behind? In the draft policy, government has proposed target missions for specified items. So for example, target missions for hypersonic missiles, 5th generation fighter aircrafts and transport aircraft shall be floated out to enable the domestic defense ecosystem to come up with the design as well as the manufacturing. And government will enable policies so that lab to line, or you can say concept to implementation time can be minimized. So this is it as far as the policy is concerned. Although right now this is a draft policy and hence a further detailed discussion on this is not required. If it becomes a proper policy, then we shall have a detailed discussion. Article Pune firm gets nod for vaccine trials appears on page number 10, where Serum Institute of India will conduct phase 2 as well as 3 clinical trials of Oxford University vaccine. The Drug Controller General of India has already given the approval to the Serum Institute of India, which is a private company, to conduct phase 2 and 3 trials of Oxford University and AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine known by the name of Covishield. Now, if you remember that this Covishield vaccine has shown a very promising response in phase 1 trial. Although phase 1 trials are generally limited to testing the safety of a vaccine, but since this is a pandemic time, it was also analyzed for the efficacy. And it was found out that this particular vaccine was able to develop desired level of immunity in the people who were injected with the vaccine. So it seems like that currently AstraZeneca Oxford is the vaccine which is not only the front runner but is also very effective, and hence it is important for us to understand that what is the mechanism of this particular vaccine. So in order to be able to understand that what this vaccine does to induce the immune response in the people, and for that obviously we need to understand how virus itself enters the body and replicates. So let us first understand how a virus interacts with the cells of our body. Now the first stage obviously is the entrance of a virus into a cell, because unless and until a virus enters a cell, it cannot replicate itself. Because virus need the cell's protein making machinery to multiply. So they first need to gain entry into a healthy cell. And as you might know, that coronavirus or COVID-19 have a special set of proteins known as spiky proteins that allow them to bind with the cells. So as you can see in the animation that the spike protein helps the virus to latch on to human cell. Then after it latches on to the cell, the virus fuses with the cell and once inside releases a strand of RNA. Now RNA or ribonucleic acid is like a blueprint, which is basically a set of genetic code that has instruction to make exact copies of the same virus. So as you can see in the animation, the virus has already released the yellow or orangish color RNA into the cell. Now the reason why the virus has entered into the cell is that it wants to create more of its copies. And in that process, it is helped by ribosomes, which are tiny particles in the host cell, which have this special capability to read genetic material. And as you can see in the animation, as the virus's RNA passes through the ribosome produces exact viral proteins which the virus wants this to produce. Now these production of viral proteins is much needed because they are the essential ingredients of viral RNA as well as other parts of the viruses like the outer spike protein itself, which in the first place helped the virus to enter into the cell. The proteins are also needed to make the outer membrane of the virus as well. So as you can see in the animation, as soon as the viral RNA interact with the ribosome, not only it is producing the RNA copy, but it is also producing the viral proteins. So the component in orange color will form the genetic material of the virus, whereas the component in the red color which is being produced will form the spike protein. And this you can see will lead to the formation or assembly of a new virus inside the host cell. And thousands and millions of more such viruses are produced inside the healthy host cells. When fully assembled, the virus can now exit the cell to seek other healthy cells and start the process again. And this goes on and on unless and until the body develops immunity against the virus. So with the explanation through animation, it is now clear to us that spike protein plays a very crucial role in the way COVID-19 enters and attaches to the cells of our body, and especially the respiratory system. Because these proteins allow the virus to penetrate into the cells and then multiply there. Viruses cannot replicate or multiply on their own, and hence they need a machinery of a cell, and for that they need to enter it first, where these spike protein play a very crucial role. So various vaccines and drugs are targeting the various steps of this viral entry and replication. AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine tries to build the immunity in the body against these spike proteins. And let us understand how. So when a person is infected with the COVID-19 virus, that is SARS-CoV-2, the reason it spreads in the body easily is because the spikes on its surface. These spikes, also known as spike protein, allow the virus to penetrate cells and therefore multiply. So the vaccine developed by Oxford and AstraZeneca, which belongs, tries to build the body's immunity against this spike protein. Now the idea is to create antibodies to fight this spiked surface so that the virus does not even have the chance to penetrate the cells. So what we intend to do is that there is a person who shall be, so in this case we are trying to build the immunity not against the virus itself but against the spiky proteins. Now let us understand how do we do that. So the vaccine does not uses the coronavirus strain. So you know that in polio vaccine, the virus which is being used is a polio virus. But in this case, the vaccine which has been developed by Oxford University does not uses the SARS-CoV virus. Instead, it uses a strain of adenovirus. So now you might ask that adenovirus can infect humans once injected. So this adenovirus is first weakened so that it does not causes any kind of sickness or illness once injected. So as you can see that it was first red in color, now it has become green. But again, it is tweaked. Now what is this tweaking? Now this tweaking is that the genetic material of this particular virus is changed in such a way that it enables the virus to manufacture the spike protein once it enters the human cell. So now you can understand that once this adenovirus will enter the human cell, it is weakened, so it can't harm humans. But at the same time, its genetic material has been tweaked in such a way that it produces the spike proteins. Now these spike proteins in themselves are not dangerous to humans. They just facilitate the COVID virus to attach to the cell. Once it is inside the cell of a human, the body's immune system is expected to recognize the spike protein as a potentially harmful foreign substance and starts building antibody against this spike protein, and hence this vaccine builds immunity against the spike protein. Now once the antibodies against spiky have already been manufactured in the human body, if that person is infected with COVID, these antibodies won't allow the attachment of the COVID with the human cell of the respiratory system. So that is how the whole mechanism works.
Now, this article on page number 15 is related to the issue of interest rates in the Indian economy. And we note that the interest rates in an economy is considered to be a key enabler to promote growth and development, and particularly when the economy is facing slowdown and recession. So the lower interest rates incentivizes higher borrowing, and which leads to increase in the investment and consumption expenditure, and hence it promotes growth. However, in India, we note that the RBI has been consistently reducing the policy repo rate by almost around 150 basis points in the last 12 months, and this has led to decrease in the average lending rates of the banks by 104 basis points. However, this reduction in the nominal rates of interest has not translated into higher borrowings on the account of higher real rate of interest. So in this background, let us understand the difference between the nominal rate of interest and the real rate of interest. And this can be important for us from preliminary examination point of view under the topic economic development. So now nominal rate of interest is the rate of interest which a person is expected to get as a saver or pay as a borrower from the bank. So for example, if a person is borrowing from the bank or is depositing money in the saving account, the rate of interest that this person will get or will have to pay as a borrower is considered as the nominal rate of interest. However, if this rate of interest is adjusted for inflation, then it is known as real rate of interest. So the formula for the real rate of interest can be seen as nominal rate of interest minus the inflation. So now for example, let us say you deposit rupees 100 in the bank for a period of 1 year, and for which the bank is expected to pay you 5% nominal interest rate. However, after 1 year, the rate of inflation is expected to be around 6%. So in this case, the real rate of interest would be negative. That is, nominal rate of interest, that is 5% minus the inflation rate of 6%. So it will be effectively minus 1%. And accordingly, you would be discouraged from depositing your money in the bank due to negative returns on your deposits. On the other hand, if the rate of inflation is expected to be around 1%, then the real rate of interest would be 4%. and hence you would go ahead and deposit your money in the bank. So if we consider this aspect from the perspective of a borrower, that person would be encouraged to borrow money from the bank only when the real rate of interest is lower, and the higher real rate of interest would discourage the person from borrowing money from the banks. So we understand that inflation plays a key role in the rate of interest that are prevailing in an economy. And accordingly, if the inflation is high, it will discourage certain amount of investments and borrowing. However, if the inflation is low, it will encourage different kinds of borrowings and investments. So now after this, let us understand the trends in the nominal and the real rate of interest in India. Now as you can see in this figure, the rate cuts which have been announced by the Reserve Bank of India have led to reduction in the rate of interest on the loans. That is, the MCLR of the banks has been reduced. However, in spite of the reduction in the MCLR, the real rate of interest or the real MCLR has increased, and that too particularly after the month of February 2019. So what are the reasons for higher real rate of interest in India? So now we note that normally to calculate the real rate of interest in India, the CPI rate of inflation is taken into account or the consumer price index is taken into account. However, several business establishments in India take into account the wholesale price index rate of inflation. And as the core wholesale price inflation has reduced from 2.3% in March 2019 to 0.8% in June 2020, there is inverse relationship between real rate of interest and the inflation. And hence, due to the decrease in the core WPI inflation, it has led to higher real rate of interest for the firms. And according to a recent report, in spite of the nominal lending rates falling by 105 basis points, the real interest rates have increased by 44 basis points in the last 12 months. And as the real interest rates are higher in India, it has discouraged the borrowings considerably. So we have seen the difference between the nominal rate of interest and the real rate of interest, which takes into account the prevailing inflation in the economy, and accordingly it encourages savings and borrowings and also investments in the economy. So with this, let's take up the next news article now. Now this article on page number 15 talks about the Purchasing Managers Index. And it reads that the manufacturing has contracted for fourth straight month, and this has been highlighted in the Purchasing Managers Index for the month of July. So accordingly, the Purchasing Managers Index becomes important for us from the preliminary examination point of view under the topic Economic Development. So let us understand the key aspects of this PMI from our preliminary examination point of view. Now the prelims compass of Indian economy provided various aspects of the Purchasing Managers Index. And regarding this, you should note that it is considered as an indicator of the economic health and business momentum in the industrial sector in an economy, and also it reflects the investors' sentiments regarding the manufacturing sector of economy. Now it should be noted that this PMI or the Purchasing Managers Index is published separately for manufacturing and for the service sector. However, it is the Purchasing Managers Index or the PMI for the manufacturing sector which is extremely important reflection of the functioning of an economy. Now, if the PMI data reads above 50 points, it indicates that there is an economic expansion in manufacturing or either the service sector. While if the reading of this PMI is less than 50, it shows that there is contraction in the economic activities. For example, India's PMI has gone down to as low as 47.9. And in the present case, this PMI was 51.2 in the month of November as provided in today's news article. So regarding this, you should note that what was the origin of the PMI or the Purchasing Managers Index. So the Institute of Supply and Management ISM, which is based in US, originally developed this concept of PMI. And this ISM was a non-profit group founded in 1915. So regarding the PMI which is published in India, you should note that the PMI data is published by the Japanese firm Nikkei. However, it is compiled and constructed by the market economics of the HSBC. And which are the indicators which are used by the PMI? So it uses 5 major indicators, and these include new orders, inventory level production, supplier deliveries, and the employment environment. Now, the important thing that should be noted about the PMI is that it does not track the volume of production in the manufacturing sector, and it only tracks the sentiment of the manufacturing sector through the survey of almost 500 private companies. So, this naturally means that it does not track the manufacturing sentiment in the public sector enterprises. And these particular observations can be important for our preliminary examination as to if the PMI tracks the PSUs or not. So, after understanding the basic points regarding the PMI, let us look at the comparison of this PMI with the Index of Industrial Production. So, by comparing the PMI and the IIP, we find that this PMI tracks only the investor's sentiment and it does not track the actual production. However, IIP tracks the actual production. Secondly, there is a difference in the publishing agencies of both these indices, and the first PMI is published by Nikki. However, the Index of Industrial Production is published by NSO or the National Statistical Office. Third point of comparison is that it covers only private sector companies. However, the IIP covers both the private sector as well as the public sector. Fourthly, the PMI covers both the manufacturing as well as the services sector. And in case of IIP, it is only concerned with the manufacturing sectors, and that is why it covers only the manufacturing in India. Fifth is that the PMI is not used for GDP calculation, and that is mainly because it only tracks the investor's sentiment. However, as the IIP covers or tracks the actual production, it is used for GDP calculation to account for unorganized sector also. So these are few points of differences between the PMI, that is the Purchasing Managers Index, and the Index of Industrial Production. And these can be important for us from preliminary examination point of view. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 6 has been written in the context of the abrogation of Article 370, which was related to the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. And in this, the author has said that the idea that Article 370 weakened the Indian Union is erroneous and against the basic understanding of democracy. So basically, this article highlights the asymmetry that is present in the Indian federalism, which takes into account the diversity of India, which has been reflected in various articles like the Article 371. And this aspect of asymmetry in the Indian federalism has been discussed in a previous DNS video, and that article appeared in the newspapers when the Article 370 was abrogated last year. So accordingly, let us revise from that DNS video the various aspects of asymmetric federalism in the context of India. And this can be important for us from the General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic Indian Polity and Constitution. Now, first, the article talks about the regional politics in India since 1989 till 2014. And in this, it has been highlighted that there was emergence of regional political parties during this time period. And due to the emergence and dominance of the regional parties in the national politics, it led to the deepening of federalism in India and also led to the growing autonomy of federal units vis-a-vis the center. However, after 2014, the scenario has changed completely because of one-party dominance at the central government level. Now, since 2014, with the emergence of single-party dominance at the central government level, the importance of the federal units has decreased. And in this background, the center has taken the decision of abrogating the Article 370 in case of Kashmir. Now, in this background, we should understand that the asymmetric federalism involves the granting of differential rights to certain federal subunits, and which is often in recognition of their distinctive ethnic identity. Now, as we all know that India is a union of various states, and the Indian Constitution provides for certain special features or special provisions with respect to certain states, and these provisions have been provided in the Article 371. Now, similarly, because of a different historical background in the way in which the Kashmir was integrated into India, there was a special article related to Kashmir which was 370. Now, Kashmir was added to India through an instrument of accession which was signed between India and the then ruler of Kashmir. Now, what this instrument of accession did to the Kashmir was that it added Kashmir to India and also provided it the autonomy in its functioning beyond most of the provisions of Indian Constitution. And this instrument of accession led to the incorporation of Article 370 as a temporary provision in the Indian Constitution. Now, in this background, the author has highlighted that this transitional or temporary clause of Article 370 became semi-permanent institutional compromise over a period of time. And this was mainly because of the politics which was taking place at the central government level, which was more dominated by the regional parties. However, with the emergence of single party dominance at the center level after 2014, this importance or the power of the federal units is decreasing. And it is due to the dominance of single party at central level after the 2014 elections. The Kashmir's special provisions have been done away with. Now, in this background of asymmetric federalism, let us understand what are the other important features or provisions in the Constitution of India which have been provided for other states. Now, such special features or asymmetric agreements or arrangements were done not only with the state of Jammu and Kashmir, however, such agreements were done with other states as well. For example, such asymmetric agreements were reached out with Nagaland and the Mizoram, and due to this, Article 371 was added to the Indian Constitution. Further, when Sikkim joined Indian Union in the early 1970s, Article 371F was added to the Indian Constitution. And this special Article 371F related to the state of Sikkim allowed for laws that were in place before the Sikkim's accession to India. Now, there are certain special provisions regarding various states in India. And these provisions are reflected in various articles like the Article 371A, which is related to the state of Nagaland, Article 371B, which is related to the state of Assam, etc. Now, this Article 371 also contains measures or provisions related to the states for providing intra-state equity. And this is in the case of the state of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Gujarat and Karnataka. Now, why such asymmetric arrangement has been done? So simply you should understand that although all states in India or all federal units in India have same provisions in the constitution, there are certain special provisions provided to some of the states in order to incorporate their ethnic identities or their special historic relation with India. And that is why, due to such asymmetric agreements, Article 370 and 371 were added in the Indian Constitution. Now, what are the arguments in favor of such asymmetric agreements? Let us understand them. So, various arguments have been forwarded regarding the asymmetric federalism. The first argument is that asymmetric constitutional provisions are common features of federalism in diverse societies. Now, as we all know that India is a diverse society and it has many regions with different languages and different cultures. Further, various states or regions in India have had different historical backgrounds and their relations with the mainland India have been different. And in this background, we have had various asymmetric constitutional provisions. Now, the first argument in favor of such asymmetric federalism is that such arrangements dampen the secessionist conflicts or it reduces the separatist tendency in various states. This is because such kind of asymmetric agreements recognize the multiple modes of belonging to one union. So such arrangements show that the center has accepted that there can be special features or different ways of accommodating the diversity. And that is why it reduces the separatist or secessionist tendencies. Now, the argument opposed to this is that such agreements can further aggravate or lead to the growth of secessionist tendencies or separatist tendencies among states. This is because although there is special features or arrangements for accommodating the diversity, it leads to the denial of autonomy to such states. For example, the Jammu Kashmir had been demanding absolute autonomy from the Indian Union. However, such a demand was not acceptable to the Union of India. So the argument which is opposed to such asymmetric or special provisions for certain states is that it leads to or increases the separatist tendency among various states. Now, such agreements or arrangements have also been criticized by major national communities and other states which do not have such special agreements. Now, the present government at the center, while removing the Article 370, has said that such asymmetric provisions are discriminatory in nature and they do not ensure equality. And in this line, the central government has highlighted the example of Article 35A, which discriminates against buying property in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, as it privileges certain kinds of special identities over the others. So they have said that such special provisions are against the notion of equality. Further, the government has claimed that the Article 370, which provided for special powers to the government of Jammu and Kashmir, was the root cause of terrorism in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Further, the government has highlighted that provisions for autonomy are anti egalitarian because they prevent the extension of rights in force elsewhere in the country to those particular regions. For example, in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, there was no provision till now for the reservation of scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. So one of the arguments in removing the Article 370 was that now the provisions of reservations for vulnerable sections like the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes can be extended to the newly created union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. Now, federalism in certain countries have been constraining and undermining the consolidation of power of national governments. For example, in United States of America, the federal units are sacrosanct in nature and they cannot be broken by the will of national government. Further, various states of United States of America have got equal representation in the Senate or the upper house, which is equivalent to the Rajya Sabha of India. However, in India, the scenario is not the same because different states have different representations in Rajya Sabha. For example, the highly populated state of Uttar Pradesh has the highest number of seats in Rajya Sabha, while small states like Nagaland, Sikkim, and Mizoram have lesser number of seats. So in this line, it has been highlighted that India represents a system where the design of federalism places fewer checks on the power of national governments or national majorities. And in this line, the Rajya Sabha has lesser power with respect to passing money bills as compared to that of Lok Sabha. Further, Indian Constitution provides autonomy to the states under the 7th schedule, but in the times of emergency, empowers the union government to take over such provisions. Further, in case of concurrent list, the union government or the parliament has the overriding powers on the powers of state governments. So in this line, the author has highlighted that placing this kind of flexibility in the hands of central government was deliberate and designed to enable decisive central action to protect national integrity in the aftermath of partition. And this was also done to arrest the separatist tendency of various regions in India. Now finally, let us understand that how such asymmetric arrangements have helped the Indian federalism in the past and why such step of removing the Article 370 unilaterally without a consensus is a departure from the previous precedents in India. Now in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar highlighted the difference between the tight mold of other federal systems and the flexibility which was provided in the Indian federal structure. And in this line, he argued that such a flexible system in India allowed for both unitary as well as federal features according to the requirements and its time and circumstances. Further, the constitutional provisions has allowed the strengthening of Indian federalism by providing the Article 3 in the Constitution. And this has provided provisions for the creation of new states and alteration of boundaries on the regional demands based on identity and language. And based on this article, various new states have been created in the background of demand for new states based on linguistic and other aspirations. Now, as we know that the Indian Constitution does not provide the states with a veto power over their own bifurcation. Now, such absence of veto power has enabled the Constitution and the central government to accommodate the linguistic and the ethnic diversities in a way that would have been much harder in a more rigid federal system. So such flexibility which has been provided in the Indian Constitution has helped the central government in accommodating the linguistic and ethnic diversity. Further, such a flexible federal system has allowed the central government to adopt asymmetrical measures without facing backlash from other regions which might have resented the special treatment of minority regions. So in this background, the author highlights that until 2000s, most of these regional changes in India were done based on slow process of consensus building within the regions concerned. However, the author has highlighted that by abrogating or removing the Article 370 and bifurcating the state of Jammu and Kashmir and downgrading its status into union territory, the government has used the flexibility of the federal provisions of Indian Constitution to other ends. And this abrogation without the consensus is a departure from the previous precedents, which is unknown in Indian federalism and can have unknown and different implications for the federalism of India. So the author is a bit skeptical about the present move of the government regarding the removal of Article 370 without a consensus and removing such an article unilaterally. Now, to better understand this article, you should go through the provisions of Indian federalism in the Lakshmikant book of Indian Polity. And after that, you can understand the various arguments that have been raised in this article by the author. So, with this, let's move to the next article. Now, with this, we conclude today's discussion. So, let's take up the question for the day now.